it's all over. I do think that quite often when I wake up in the morning really early when I went to bed late. I'm so glad I didn't act on that thought 2 years ago, back in 2012. Kim and I both started EYP 2 years ago.
I'll say just a few words before we officially open the ceremony, just to perhaps kind of hopefully implant the idea in your heads that today is a really unique opportunity for you. You might be really nervous, that's a given. You might not quite know what to expect, that's also a given. But as you've already seen, EYP is just more than debating. Okay, you've already tried to solve the Syria crisis, which is not an easy feat on a Sunday morning, but you've done a very good job at it from what I've heard. And now you have the opportunity to discuss really important topics with your peers who you would not necessarily otherwise have that chance to do. So all I want to say is do not, under any circumstances, let your fears or anticipations or worries get in the way of you saying exactly what you want to say and putting the words that you want to put across to everybody. There's one quote which, walking around the classrooms, again, as you noticed, all relatively history classrooms, so there's lots of quotes from inspirational individuals, but there's one quote which I found which really stands out. Now, I do apologise, it is slightly a heavy quote for a Sunday, but it was from Gandhi, and he said, "Live as if you'll die tomorrow, learn as if you'll live forever." Now, I really want to focus on the last part of that quote. Learn as if you will live forever. And the point of that is to make sure that you make the most of every single opportunity. Today you're going to learn a lot about Europe. Today you're going to learn a lot about debating. And make sure that you learn those lessons today and you take them forward. And that's what I want you to do today. Don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to have your voices heard. Don't be afraid to debate the topics that are important to you. So provide
market. If you got 15% of the market, you're still a pretty big company. And if 3 or 4 companies, well, work together, they are sort of creating a monopoly. That's not what you want.
Thank you very much for that point there. Cartel is a buzzword in the United Kingdom at the moment.
Politicians are good, much better than politicians who make the newspaper because of bad behavior or profiteering. But before thinking of new plans and spending more money to increase the voting turnout, we suggest Euro parliamentarians begin by focusing more on their task, staying on until Friday at 5 p.m. so they can also attend the vote, and taking their job more seriously. The parliamentarians first have to do something about their damaged image. Once they have polished this up, it will be much easier to attract voters. In addition to this, more of a left-right party system can also help the voters identify with their Euro parliamentarians, and thus increase the desire to vote. The defending committee also wants to encourage member states to create an obligatory course about the EU's history and its functioning in all secondary schools, a course which emphasizes the success of the European project as well as the need for further integration to ensure its continuance. But we agree that it should be about the pros and cons of the European project. Otherwise, it sounds like propaganda. Students at schools should receive honest and unbiased education based on the objective truth. They should be taught about the different opinions people have. They should be taught about European successes and about its failures. It would be equal to lying to the students if in teaching them about the EU, we fail to mention the problems European integration has caused. Additionally, the need for further integration that you propose schools emphasize is an open question, and one that is heavily debated within the national governments of the member states. Schools should therefore be free to talk about the pros and cons of further European integration. We cannot oblige schools to promote the European cause. This goes against our basic ideology of free speech, free opinion, and free education. And of course, it's not the EU, but the schools, national governments, and teachers who determine the content of their education and their curriculum. There is no need for the EU to interfere in this area. The Defending Committee also supports a treaty change that grants the right of initiative to the EP and the Council of the European Union, as well as allowing the EP to dismiss individual commissioners. We do not support this. This would give the EP too much power. We are not a European people. We are British, German, Dutch, and so on. The most important decisions should be taken in our national parliament. Moreover, allowing the EP to dismiss individual members of the European Commission would mean that a Dutch member of the European Commission could be sent away by parliamentarians from other countries. Well, this is definitely not the way to go. In conclusion, before there can be any thoughts of increasing the power of the European Parliament, parliamentarians should polish up their images and behave more responsibly. This, in all likelihood, will attract voters. With more voters, the EU will become an organization of the European people. That would be the time to reopen these talks.
Thank you very much.
Sooner.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Is one member of the proposing committee willing to come in front and read out the operative clauses, and we want you recognized?
Dear Mr. President, members of the board, and fellow delegates. 1. Recommends the European Commission to establish a European Climate Adaptation Fund, the ECAF, that will invest in long-term climate adaptation measures for private companies. 2. Suggests that the contribution of each member state to this fund be based on the likelihood of the natural disasters occurring in the member state. 3. Calls upon member states to implement policies that oblige citizens to insure themselves against all forms of natural disasters. And 4. Calls upon the Council of European Municipalities that regions, CERM, to establish partnerships between municipalities and regions that face similar challenges when it comes to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd now give the floor to the proposing committee again in order to listen to the defense speech. And we want to be recognized, and we have 3 minutes.
Dear Mr. President, members of the board, honorable guests, and fellow delegates, climate change is impacting Europe greatly. A couple of notable results of this are that Europe has had to deal with numerous extreme weather events such as heat waves, floods, and droughts. This has resulted in rising damage costs across Europe in recent years. The European Youth Parliament is concerned about the effects of these climatological changes on the lives of many European citizens. Although some measures have been taken to prevent climate change or to at least reduce its impact, these are far from sufficient. Unfortunately, however, not everyone seems to yet realize this. Despite improved general knowledge about climate change and its impact and its potential for disasters, the threat it poses is still greatly underestimated by many citizens. For instance, not many European citizens know that the 1953 disaster we had in Zeeland, Holland, cost us just about 2 billion guilders. That's much more than it would have cost us if we had prepared sufficiently. Very unfortunate indeed. The threat for natural catastrophes and the potential impact in our society is likely to increase even further as a result of two complementary trends. Firstly, the scale and frequency of natural catastrophic events, such as the frequently recurring floods that cause millions of people to face losses, are likely to increase due to climate change. Secondly, the impact of natural catastrophes is increasing due to the growing number of people living in areas with a high risk exposure, as well as the increased economic activity in these zones. This problem demands cooperation and solidarity among all member states. The vulnerability of regions and sectors to climate change varies widely across Europe. It seems justified that the most vulnerable and disadvantaged regions, in other words, those that are most affected by climate change, will receive help in taking the necessary measures to act. We therefore propose the establishment of a European Climate Adaptation Fund. Such a fund will invest private projects that contribute to long-term climate adaptation measures. However, the past has shown us that some member states see natural disaster policies as less important than other member states, and thus they will have to contribute more to this fund. Besides this adaptation fund, we also call upon the member states to take responsibility for raising the awareness about the threats that climate change poses among its constituents and implement policies. Thank you.
The river in Central Europe and the villages along the German part of the Rhine will not suddenly arouse a feeling of solidarity between Hungary and Germany.
Thank you very much. And the final point of that first round of open debate will come from NB2. NB2, you're recognized.
As NB2 already said, countries that have to adapt to climate changes are often the countries already poor. You want these countries to contribute more to the fund than other, more stable, economically stable countries. These countries have to contribute more than other countries, but they cannot afford it. How will you solve this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we mostly discussed the contribution to a potential fund and the given situation of risk for some countries. Also, it was said that cooperation does not necessarily foster the prevention of cooperation of regions does not necessarily foster the prevention of catastrophes. And now we will go back to the proposing committee in order to find some answers to the first round of open debate. The proposing committee is recognized.
First of all, I would like to thank everyone for the people are insured against natural disasters. When they lose everything, they will still get things and their life won't be as terrible as it was without their insurance. Natural disasters are named natural for a cause. They are almost unpreventable. If you are insured against a natural disaster, it will cost you less money. Regarding Emplo 1, countries with a higher risk, they need to pay more. But this is mostly for countries who have the higher risk, and that's pretty logical, because if they are hit by a natural disaster, they will get the most money. Regarding AFCO, it is almost impossible to oblige people to insure themselves. Well, it's for the people, it's a better idea to insure themselves. It's for their own safety, and again, when they lose everything, they can get things back. Regarding employment 2, Every people who don't have a lot of money to pay their insurance, they will have to pay less. With most insurances, it is that it's based on your income, and it will be also like that with our insurances.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to the proposing committee later, and we have a direct response on insurance and the costs of insurance from NV2. You're recognized.
When people have to be insured, they might get their money back, but they won't get back any family members they might have lost in disasters. It's therefore vitally important that we don't focus on combating the costs that are attached to this kind of disasters, but to prevent these disasters from happening altogether.
Okay, thank you. That was also on the edge because you added another dimension and did not really relate to the cost. However, we will start the second round of open debate.
First, about the long-term solution. In our things we state that we will invest in long-term climate adaptation so that even not only short-term but also in long-term problems and natural disasters can be stopped. And then about the things that countries that with the most likely chance of having a natural disaster get a baby on. Countries like Holland have built dikes to prevent natural disasters, so their chance is lowered. So if you already invested in this, you have to pay less money. And countries that didn't invest in this earlier, so preventing natural disasters, have to pay it now. I think that wasn't about it.
Thank you. We'll now open the last round of open debate, and we'll start with you, we'll move to the next point of open debate, and that will come from Kalt.
I would like to take the third operative clause of implementing policies that oblige citizens to insure themselves against all forms of natural disasters violates competition law according to the Dutch authority that protects the Dutch people against non-competitive measures, called the ACM, Autoriteit Consumentenmarkt. And that being illegal, it is also impossible to stimulate civilians in insuring themselves voluntarily, because no one will be willing to pay that much for something that might not even happen.
Thanks for presenting that well-researched point, and we will now move to NV2.
Econ 2 said that countries have their own ways of preventing disasters. However, poorer countries have less money to spend on prevention, whilst richer countries should actually help be solidary with them and help them pay for their safety. Thank you.
Thank you. We have, as planned, 3 remaining points for open debate. However, a situation might come up where the usage of a direct response placard might be helpful. Keep that in mind. Without further ado, we go to employment 1. NV1 is recognized because of the direct response.
If poor countries with a high risk need to pay more for the fund, it's logical, because they already had to pay if they had high risk. If they wanted to prevent and not die, how it actually is, if they wanted to be safe, they already had to pay. So if they...
I'm sorry, the last point was not really...
It wasn't from them.
No, it was from them, I know, still.
It was about poor countries.
Could we stop that discussion between the two of us? I'm sorry. We'll move on to the next point of open debate, and that will come from the Committee on Constitutional Affairs. You're recognized.
Thank you. NV1. One of the key questions of your resolution is, what can the European Union do to make your citizens more aware of the consequences of the climate change? But don't you think, NV1, that humanity is warned enough, and right now it's the time for strict laws that decrease the harming of environment? Like, for example, before 2025, everybody has to drive a hybrid car, and normal cars should be forbidden. Like, there has to come strict rules to decrease the harming of the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's a direct response to that by the Committee on Monetary and Economic Affairs. You can do.
We want to respond on your point. Forbidding normal cars that use fossil fuels will not prevent earthquakes from happening.
Thanks for pointing that out. And we will move to employment 2. You're recognized.
You say that because of the CO2 is the reason for climate change and the natural disasters. But if you look back in history, you can see that this happened before and there was way less CO2. So this has no actually point.
Thank you. That was about the impact of CO2 emissions when it comes to natural catastrophes, so those points were related indeed. We will come to the last point of open debate now, and that will come from employment 1. You're recognized.
I would like to notice that at OC4 you are talking about connecting regions with similarities, but my problem is not a single region is the same. There is always a difference in culture, in spendings, in politics. Regions are never the same. You can't just simply put something one-to-one.
Thank you very much. I would now kindly invite a member or two of the proposing committee to come up to the front and deliver the summation speech.
Dear members of the board, fellow delegates, we have had an interesting debate and shared many interesting thoughts and discussion, some of which may have to be looked into in the future. I will summarize a few of the important things mentioned. First of all, the money it costs. Well, of course, prevention costs money, but the national disaster is much more expensive. Building up a country, for instance, like Fukushima, is much more expensive than if they would have spent more money on prevention. And that some countries need to pay a bit more because of their higher risks. That's pretty logical, it's because they already had some if they wanted to defend themselves. And well, and something that might not happen, well, a long-term fund, well, they also have to pay for long-term. Not everything should be short-term. Well, it's...
However, as mentioned, we are concerned about the impending effects of climate change on the lives of many European citizens. We feel that if there are any further delay in setting up the European Climate Adaptation Fund, various European regions will be confronted with the destructive powers of an increasing number of natural disasters. Although much is being done to stop the climate change, from emission control to measures to call a halt to deforestation and setting up wind farms all across Europe, it is not enough. The climate has already changed. We will have to do more about. We will have more natural disasters. We do have to be prepared for them. In short, we have to manage our risks, all of us. The EU states members have to manage the risk of their constituents by mapping out the endangered areas and making adaptations so that losses and destructions can be kept to a minimum. The EU constituents have to manage their risk by insuring themselves and their properties against the destructive effects of natural disasters. We cannot force the EU constituents to do this. We can call upon our member states and make this a compulsory clause in the insurance policies in their respective countries. If we don't do anything, the cost in the long term will be much higher, and not only in terms of money, also in lives. Please vote for our resolution. Thank you.